confession time. When I looked to see what today's gospel reading was going to be for this week, I groaned out loud in frustration, probably loud enough for the preschool to hear me from my office. You see, there's something that I think holds true for a lot of preachers and for anyone who really studies the Bible deeply. What I think holds true is that there are certain biblical texts that preachers live and breathe and find to be at the core of our faith in Jesus Christ. But for me, today's gospel reading has not been one of them, ever. This text frustrates me. Part of me wants to look at the disciples in the face and say, really? You're saying a man's blindness is the result of sin? I even want to say to Jesus, why would God make a person be born blind just to show God's power later by healing them? What's the point? So I admit I went into writing this sermon with a lot of uneasy feelings, questions, and flashbacks to times when I've seen people use it as a way to blame parents for their child's disabilities. And that frustrates me. This is where I have to give one of my good friends from seminary some credit. She sat with me on Facebook chat the other night and helped me name those specific things that were roadblocks for me in my study and proclamation of the gospel this week. In a way, she helped me see some things that I had been blind to because of my own prejudices and frustrations concerning this text. She reminded me that there's a whole lot more going on here, and that it is indeed gospel. It is indeed good news. Here we encounter a man who's truly on the fringes of his society. He's been physically blind from the day he was born, and the culture and religion of the time believed that this blindness happened because of some sort of sin, either his own or his parents'. But Jesus has something else in mind here. He straightens out the disciples' thinking, and he goes and heals this man and restores his sight. Jesus even breaks the rules of keeping the Sabbath to do that, which we find out later gets him into some trouble with the Pharisees. At this point, there are two things that catch my attention. The man who was born blind does not cry out to be healed. Jesus simply approaches him and heals him. That's the first thing. This is the second, and I'm going to quibble with the Greek here a little bit. The translation that we use in our Celebrate insert says something like, neither his parents nor he sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. But the Greek, the language it was originally written in, only says this, neither his parents nor he sinned, but that God's works might be revealed in him. According to John, Jesus doesn't say that God made this man be born blind to later reveal God's works or power in his healing. This difference, I think, is important, and I think it helps us get to the heart of what's happening in this text. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe that God's works are absolutely revealed in that healing. But I think it goes deeper than a physical restoration of sight. Jesus approaches this man, who probably heard his exchange between himself and the disciples. He heard Jesus tell him to go wash his eyes after Jesus puts a nice big glob of muddy spit on his eyes. Saliva at this time was believed to be cleansing, which to us today is probably really weird and kind of gross, but that's what they thought. And so this happened, and the man could then see. Certainly this can't be the same guy, the community and the Pharisees ask. But it's him. One would hope that this would mean that the formerly blind man could be let back into his community and no longer viewed as a beggar. But he's not. He and his parents are interrogated about who healed him and why. So what he tells the Pharisees is essentially this. Yes, I was born blind, but the man Jesus put mud on my eyes and told me to go wash. And now all of a sudden I can see. Yes, it's me. Maybe this guy's a prophet, but I really don't think he can be a sinner. God wouldn't let a sinner do this great thing for me. And as the Pharisees question him further, we hear the formerly blind man growing frustration at the Pharisees. All he knows is that he's been healed and that Jesus did the healing. Well, the Pharisees don't like this at all, and they drive him out of the synagogue. They drive him out of his community. But he is sought out and found by Jesus. In their last exchange, the man comes to believe that Jesus is the Son of Man. He's the Messiah. And he falls down and worships him. Their encounter from the beginning is about more than restoring sight. We might look at it as a journey from unbelief to relationship to belief. This man who was born blind first hears, then sees, then believes, then worships the one who healed him. Yes, in that act of healing, God's works were revealed. But maybe not in the same way we might have initially thought. So what does this have to do with us now? Especially those of us who have always been Christians. Well, a lot, actually. Perhaps we, once we're comfortable in our belief or faith in Jesus, become a little blind sometimes. Maybe blind to places, things, or people around us that God might be doing some kind of different work in unexpected places. Maybe we become kind of like the Pharisees, wondering or worrying about keeping the laws of our tradition. Or even questioning how someone else could view Jesus or the church and what Jesus does through the church in such a different way than we do. And maybe it takes hearing and seeing, experiencing a different encounter with the living Christ to open our eyes to a deeper relationship with God, which leads to a shift in how we worship God. But what about anyone who may not have been raised in the church? Perhaps you heard about Jesus or the Christian religion through words of gospel and grace spoken to you at a time of difficulty in your lives. Then perhaps that hearing turned into seeing the grace of God come to life in the ways that other Christians embraced you into various worshiping communities. That seeing then deepens the experience of and relationship with God, which leads to worship and proclaiming the good news of healing, restoration, and forgiveness that is found in Jesus, who is the Messiah. Whatever our own stories or experiences may be, we can find some common ground and common experiences within this text that we can relate to. We first hear that maybe there is something to this guy named Jesus. Then we experience God's work around us in some way, which strengthens our relationship with God in a whole host of ways. We come to know and worship the one who was crucified and risen for us and for all. Not because we've just decided to believe in him, but because we've experienced the ways in which he reaches out to us and others in peace, forgiveness, and healing. And I know I probably talk about some of these things a lot, but that's because I find it so fully and completely true and vital. More true than I can ever really express in one sermon. This Jesus we've heard about, seen, believed in, and worshipped seeks us out when others try to throw us away or only see us for our faults, shortcomings, or physical differences. The community couldn't believe that the man standing in front of them was the same blind man that they had known for years. Their blindness lay in not being able to see him as anything other than a blind beggar. But just as Jesus saw the Samaritan woman at the well last week, Jesus sees this man. He sees him and declares why he came, so that those who do not see or understand may be able to, and to judge those who think they know and see everything already. So in my opinion, this is kind of an extra smack in the back of the head to the Pharisees. It's a wake-up call. They're supposed to have. They're supposed to know everything about God. And the blind man isn't supposed to know anything about God. Not really. But in this act of healing, and of Jesus seeing him as he is, and seeking him out, the formerly blind man sees more about God than these Pharisees ever really have. He sees that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. He sees the one who restored him, who invites him to become something new. A disciple of Christ who can share his own experiences of blindness and sight, of unbelief and belief with other people. And so as I come to the end of this sermon and to my thinking about this text, I find that my dear friend from seminary was right. This text that once made me bristle with frustration, and yes, with anger, is just as full and life-giving as any of the texts I live and breathe in other ways. She helped me to see God at work in John's narrative and in this healing story. Her words even challenged me and forced me to think about what God does and is doing through Jesus in a different way. It's kind of been an experience of moving from hearing about Jesus to seeing him at work in these words, to believing that he was indeed revealing God's works and power in that healing of the blind man, to worshiping him and giving thanks for what he did for that same man and for what he does for all people. It's my hope that everyone can experience a sort of healing like I did concerning this text. That everyone can find things about God that challenge or frustrate you. Not so you'll give up on God or the Bible, but so that you can explore the places or texts you might be blind or closed off to sometimes. In that exploration, I pray that our eyes may be opened together, so that we can more fully worship and believe in the one who restores our sight and brings us to a new life and new relationship with him. Amen.